customer is at the heart of this, and if you do not address the concerns the customers have, then you will not realize the benefits. So we're going to bring a panel up in a moment to discuss how can we protect data and share it safely and securely. But first, could you take your voting pads in your hands again? Now this time, you get to vote twice. So we're going to ask you in a couple of cases to pick two options. Very simply here, you press once, you then wait for the light to go out, and then you press again. The voting system will take your last two answers. So again, you can change your mind within the 20 seconds, but it will take your last two answers. So can we have that first question up? Right, we've talked a lot about new business models and other people wanting access to this data. Which third-party service providers would you expect to be the most active in accessing and using vehicle data? So who's going to want it most and use it most? Would it be, and say you pick two options here, 1, garages and breakdown services, 2, insurance companies, 3, financial and fleet service providers, 4, road infrastructure operators, 5, the social networks, entertainment and travel service providers, and number 6, search engine operators and advertising marketers. So who do you think is going to want this data most and use it most? And say, pick 2 of those if you would. You press when the light goes out, you can press again. Let's start the voting. You have about 5 seconds left. Okay, let's have a look at the results. So, insurance companies at 27% coming out very highly. That's the people you think are most going to make use of it. After them comes the road infrastructure, but pretty close are the garages and the search engine operators. Interestingly, only 11% you think social networks, so less interested. Financing also fairly key, so quite a big middle ground, but insurance companies coming out as the biggest users of this data. Okay, this question of responsibility, we heard earlier, a great responsibility. Who bears, let's have that second question up if you would. Who bears responsibility for the safe and secure operation of a vehicle that exchanges data with the outside world? Who is it primarily? You're only voting for one here. So of all of these, who is responsible? Number 1, third-party service providers. Number 2, the vehicle manufacturer. Number 3, the driver, him or herself. And number 4, the telecoms operators who provide the connection. So who, in your eyes, bears the prime responsibility for the safe and secure operation of the vehicle? Let's start the voting. About 7 seconds left. You can only pick one here, your last vote will count. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, 57% of you think it is the vehicle manufacturer, and that's interesting because that matches the Twitter poll we did ahead of the event where 51%, just over 51%, said the same. The driver is only 13%. That compares, interestingly, the Twitter poll, 35% thought the driver bore some responsibility here. 15% the people who are going to use this data, who we just talked about, and 16% the telecom operators, so fairly evenly spread. Okay, let us just have one more question here, and Eric talked at the beginning about the guiding principles that ASEA uses in their commitment on this issue. I want to hear what you think the guiding principles should be to define third-party access to vehicle-generated data. So when we discuss how to make this data available to others, what do you think the guiding principles should be? And we've picked here from some guiding principles that ASEA themselves have identified as being absolutely central. You can, again, select 2 options. 1, customer choice. 2, fair competition. 3, privacy and data protection. 4, safety, security, and liability. 5, interoperability, and 6, return on investment. So in deciding who should have access to what and how, what would your guiding principles be? Is it simply to give the customer as much choice as possible? Is it to ensure fair competition? Is it to absolutely focus on that question of the privacy and data protection? Crucial question of safety and security, interoperability, or making sure that those who made the investments get the return? Let us start the voting, and you can choose 2 options this time. We have about 5 seconds left. Okay, so on your guiding principles, 18% is seen as, we go back to the customer and the customer being at the heart of this, but way out in front of all the others, safety, security, and liability. So if it's not safe and secure, then none of the other considerations would matter so much. Privacy and data protection seen as nearly as important. Less so, interesting, we talked a lot about return on investment in the last panel in terms of the infrastructure. Only 2% of you thinking that is most important. Interoperability also came up in the last panel, 6%. But fair competition and return on investment much, much lower. We'll come back to that with our panel and see if they agree with those figures. Thank you all very much. And can I just remind you now, please don't take your voting pads away with you. Just leave them on the seat when you go. So let us bring up our panel to discuss this issue and some of those results. Jacob Bangsgaard, Director General, FIA Region 1. That's, of course, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, and he's responsibility for FIA's mobility activities in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Sebastian Zimmermann, Head of Data Services Connect a Car at the BMW Group. Please do come and join us, Sebastian, and sit next to Jacob. Dirk Staudenmayer, Head of Unit for Contract Law in DG Just in the European Commission. Shane Rooney, Executive Director, GSMA, which of course represents mobile operators worldwide, who's on the Connected Living program. Shane, great to have you with us. Frank Schlehuber, who is Aftermarket Director at CLEPA, the European Association of Automotive Suppliers. And last but not least, Dirk Wollschlaeger, General Manager, Global Automotive Industry, IBM, where he leads now on the global business with customers in automotive, aerospace, and the defense industries. So a very wide perspective on this crucial issue. I want to come back really to where we started, because Eric very much identifying this, as I said earlier, as his most important challenge, most important issue to address. Do you agree that this is absolutely central to making the most of what Roberto Viola called the gigantic opportunities? We heard a lot about the benefits. And if you do agree that it is crucially important, what are the biggest challenges in relation to data privacy and protection and safety security we have to address? Because very striking, our audience poll made it very clear that those are the central issues: safety and security, and protecting people's data. Let's get some early thoughts. Jacob, from your perspective, what's the challenge to realize the benefits but address these concerns?
Well, first of all, thank you, ASEA, for inviting me to speak at this event. I think if Eric had been asking me for advice on the title to this event, I would have suggested something like data generated from smart cars, paid and driven by people, because that's more our approach, that as long as we are not talking about autonomous vehicles, we are talking about vehicles that are paid by consumers. And Eric did also mention that, therefore, the consumer aspect is so important to be able to sell the technologies that we are all developing. So looking beyond our commercial interest, because most of us here have commercial interest in the data, if you look beyond, then safety and security is a key issue for all of us. If you ask the consumers, safety is the key issue. If you ask them if they want to embrace connected services, we did a survey and we had, the response was 76% were saying they were ready to embrace connected services, but 85% of these were concerned about hacking, and 88% of them were concerned about the use of their private data. So when we talk about privacy, data protection, and security, safety security is a key issue, and we have to solve these issues. And it will be more and more challenging. We have been investigating this. One of our members managed to get access to more than 2 million vehicles using an iPhone. We had another test of keyless car systems where we, on 16 models, could get access within seconds to these cars. There was a mentioning earlier also about the mileage fraud, the odometer tampering, and this is a huge business for criminals. And there you have, within seconds, even I can access the vehicle and change the odometer. So it is a huge issue, and it will continue to be a huge issue.
So from the customer perspective, although they do want to take advantage of these smart cars, if it is not at the cost, it cannot be at the cost of their safety or their security. They have real concerns. So as Eric said at the beginning, if we don't address this, then none of the rest of it will happen. Sebastian, from your point of view and from the vehicle manufacturers, we heard there and we saw in our poll when you asked about who bears responsibility for this question, 57% of our audience, 51% of our Twitter poll said it's you. So the challenges for you, and what for you as vehicle manufacturers is the biggest challenge?
Yes, I mean, for us, the top priority, of course, is also ensuring safety, security, and integrity of the vehicle, as well as to protect the privacy of the driver. That's very important. And of course, people look at the manufacturers to make sure that this is the case. And this means, in turn, that the vehicle manufacturer has to be in a position where the vehicle manufacturer can also control the data flows. Yeah? So the vehicle manufacturer needs to be able to control the off-board systems as well as the onboard systems and the communication between these two systems. And that's why we propose what you already have seen in the morning by Mr. Jonert, that vehicle sharing, data sharing will be done through a secure off-board facility.
Okay, so that is the central question. You cannot assume your responsibility unless you have that control. So that is the biggest thing that need to be addressed. Dirk, from your point of view, and we've talked a lot about frameworks and now focusing on the legal framework for all of this, what do you see as the key challenge here? Eric mentioned earlier, we have now the data protection legislation. He said the most modern system in the world. But this area of access to the data generated by a vehicle, do you think it requires specific attention, and are there special challenges in this area?
Yes. I mean, first of all, in terms of challenges, I would mention, which has already been mentioned, the respect for data protection rules. That is key. Many have emphasized that without this, we cannot create the customer's trust, and without the customer's trust, we will not have a fully functioning data economy, and you will not get your car sold, basically. So that's an important point, and it's more, as I said, a prerequisite than a challenge. The second one, and here I'm answering directly to your question, basically, we need to have a bundle of objectives together. We need to make sure that for a well-functioning data economy, there is a relatively large access, a free flow of data between the different market participants. We want that new business models, innovative business models, often done by startups or very small and medium-sized enterprises, can pop up because they are really the innovative force in the economy. We want that market barriers are relatively low so that new market entrants can come in and increase competition, because that again is an overall advantage for the economy. And obviously what we want also is investment security for those who invest in collecting data, in processing data. There needs to be a fair return, which has already been mentioned. You obviously do not want to pass data to your competitors. Again, a legitimate interest. But that basically has to be in a balance. And finally, the last point, because we were speaking about safety and security, part of the investment security and part of the framework is definitely liability. As a clarification, of liability, possibly adaptation of liability rules, but possibly also the existing rules work. So these are the points I wanted to mention.
So with liability, we need to review it. It may not need to be adjusted, but we need to look at it very closely.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you. I'll get some opinions on that later. Shane, from your perspective, and of course, you're involved in connected living. This is the Internet of Things is raising these sorts of dilemmas in many, many sectors. These questions of the trade-off between the benefits, the 76% who want the additional services, etc., and the 85 and 88% who have concerns about issues such as hacking and data privacy. What do you see as the key challenges to get this right when it comes to smart cars?
I think it actually comes back to getting the trust of the consumer, and I think we've heard some views already on that in terms of, especially here in Europe, probably more skeptical in terms of accepting new services, what's happening to my data, and I think we have to build this trust with the consumer to allow them to make the decision, what data can you access in my vehicle, what information about me that you have, how it's going to actually be used, and ultimately, what's in it for me as a consumer. The connected car industry will be a commercial proposition, and a lot of investment, and we heard lots about where is that investment going to come from. Nobody is going to invest if the consumer is not on board. So we've got a lot of work to do in that.
So that emphasis that ASEA put in their principles on consumer choice, I choose to share my data or I do not, and on transparency about what is being shared, for you would be absolutely central.
It's central. It's not really about technology. The technology is there around security. We still have to address that security across the connected car ecosystem, whether that's the vehicle manufacturer, the device manufacturer, the cloud provider, the mobile network. All that has to be addressed as one for us.
Frank, from your perspective and from the automotive supplier's perspective, the biggest challenges to realize the gigantic opportunities. How do you see the opportunities? And what do you think are the biggest challenges for you as a sector to make the most of them?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, this connectivity has really the potential to change the market. And it will be definitely for the future the access key to business. And this is what the entire discussion at the moment is really about. And from our perspective, it's very clear. Security, vehicle integrity, these are the no-brainers. Without that being given, we should not start to think about business models or any kind of businesses attracting investments in that sector, because at the end you need the consumer to accept these kind of services. So if we really want to go ahead, the challenge here will be that we have to master the gap between, on one side, tamper-proof of access, and on the other side, that we ensure a free and undistorted competition. I think this is the main gap we have to bridge, and to allow all market participants a fair access to the market, we have to find ways how to get out of a political position which we had in the last 2 years, where we made no progress in terms of practical models and how to proceed here. I think with the proposal which we published today, we made a substantial first step to open up here.
What was the obstacle? Why was it so hard to make progress?
Good, we had on one side the topic liability, and we had it a couple of times this morning, this afternoon here. We talk about computer on wheels, but in fact it's not a computer on wheels, because a computer will not kill anyone. A vehicle can do that if something goes wrong with it and if it's accessed badly from outside. Therefore, we have to see this in a different way, in a different dimension. And knowing that, the topic of the liabilities and who is doing what in the entire ecosystem. I think that's crucial. Without a clear understanding on that, we will never get any progress in the political discussion.
Thank you very much. We'll come back on that, I hope, during our discussion. But from your perspective, Dirk, what do you see now as what is the central challenge here from IBM's perspective, from your looking at it from an IT perspective, the central challenge if we're going to get this balance? There are some things that cannot be traded off, but there are, in terms of data protection, people might say, well, I'm willing to share a certain amount of my data in order to get the services. I won't compromise on safety and security, but I might on the privacy of my data. How do you see the challenge ahead to get this balance right?
Yeah, I also agree that the recent decisions and regulations are really a landmark, because I always said we are living in a chaos a little bit, and we are looking for ways out of the chaos, because everybody tried to get access to the vehicle, and everybody used the dongle to get access to the data of the vehicle, so we didn't have a control point. And finally, as we have seen, the OEMs have been seen as reliable for the client data and for the privacy and security, of course. So from that perspective, what we have seen, and this really was scary, that a vast majority of the dongles have not been secure. So that means a lot of people got access from outside on the vehicle functions. And finally, nobody will probably see or know this company who built this little dongle in Taiwan, but they look to BMW and say, wow, your car is not working, or the brakes didn't work. So, and with this kind of mobility platform and the clear communication between the vehicle to the OEM backend and from the OEM backend to the mobility platform, we have now a clear structure.
And just coming straight to that point, because of this, Sebastian made the point, and so did Eric at the beginning, about controlling the data flows. If the responsibility lies with them, the role of people like yourselves who can provide, so the OEM acts as the intermediary, takes the data. You think when in this debate about direct access to the data on board, or providing it through a neutral platform of the sort you might be able to provide off-board, how do you see the arguments both ways? Because there are those who say, no, just give us the access to the data in the vehicle. We don't see the problem.
Yeah, I have just yesterday it's perfect timing for this. So there was a communication of the Commission regarding data privacy here, and now, since yesterday, it changed significantly that all data are seen as personal data. So in the past, we had personal data, sensitive data, operational data, and now we have only personal data. That means the OEMs and the industry get more control about the data. And in the past, there was no system behind it. For us, it was always a little bit, we have worked sometimes on the creepy line, is this service possible in Europe or not? Now we have a clear guidance, if we like it or not, because not everybody likes that this is this kind of limitation probably, but at least we have some kind of clear regulation now.
Okay. Eric talked at the beginning about an open yet protected system. How can you be as open as possible, but as protective as necessary, if I could put it simply that way? For the rest of you, in terms of this debate about direct access to in-vehicle data versus off-board through a neutral platform, what for you is the best solution? Jakob, what do you see as the best way forward?
Well, I think from a business perspective on using this data, I think what is the best solution is that this data is kept the same data for all third parties, providers of services. So that means that if the manufacturer is keeping this data on its own server, then it has to be the same data that has to be available for all third-party suppliers of services.
So for you, the issue is not how you get to it, whether you get to it in the vehicle or via a platform.
As long as the quality is as, well, again, safety and security, we discussed that, but then the data that is remaining, the data that gets out, which is generated by the owner of the vehicle, and thereby, in most cases, will think that this data is linked back to him or her as a data subject. This data should be then transportable to any service that this person would like to be offered.
Okay, but then
by a third-party service
should
provider.
the potential service provider, the person who's going to make some money out of the use of this data, have to pay for that data because they're going to get a business benefit from it, or not?
Yes, they should. They should pay for the data, but they should not pay several times for this data, and it should be in a fair competition about the access to data. If they're not allowed to get direct access to the data, then they should have a quality of data which is the same as is used by the services that manufacturers or others are using.
So fair competition, not rated that highly by our audience, but absolutely central here to get this right and to make sure users benefit in a fair way.
It's just a matter of fair competition and also a fair price for the consumer.
Okay. I'll come back in a moment, Dirk, if I would, to you about how we fix this from a regulatory point of view. But just in terms of this debate about direct access versus indirect, would you agree with Jakob, it's not really about how you access it for him, it's more about what you can access. And would you share the concerns that the vehicle manufacturers have expressed about direct access? Do you think we have a solution in this off-board neutral provider? Does that provide an answer to our security concerns? Shane?
I think it depends on the use case and the service that's actually offered, whether you need direct access or indirect access.
Can you give an example?
You had on your poll about insurance companies, for instance. You don't need that information immediately. That can be processed off the vehicle, off board. And there's some great examples of that actually happening today. Some mobile operators are collaborating with insurance companies to provide services to young drivers whose insurance premiums have been pretty high. And because of the activity and the data they're getting from the vehicle, they can see whether they're a good driver or a poor driver, and the insurance is adjusted accordingly. So that's happening today. You don't need anything new in terms of technology. It's a good use of off-board data harvesting in that respect. And if you're looking for live information, say for example, traffic information, you are going to need direct access immediately to be able to have a good quality traffic information service, which maybe Brussels could do with it.
Sebastian, it depends on the use, it depends what the need is for that data.
I wouldn't quite agree. Of course, there are different interfaces already. Some of them are regulated, like the OBD, onboard diagnostics interface, which is used for emissions testing as well as repair and maintenance when the vehicle is stationary. And I think it's a very important issue. This interface has never been designed for access to vehicle data while the car is in operation. To what you said, you can be fast through a back-end component as well. Yeah? If we are talking about something which is really time critical in a sense that you want to notify a driver, then we are on the domain of the automotive manufacturer anyways, because we have to ensure that there's no driver distraction, that the right information is given to the drivers, and so I think that's a different discussion.
Okay, I'll ask you, Dirk. I mean, I'll come to you in a minute, Frank. But from a technical perspective, it can be done really fast through using an off-board system as well. Is that true?
Absolutely, fully agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Milliseconds.
Milliseconds. So there is no technological reason to distinguish between different types of use.
No, I wouldn't separate this at that point. I mean, but I agree that it's depending on the use case.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we do it in the back end or in the vehicle, this is not the question from my perspective.
Frank?
I think it's really not the matter of what technology is used. I think the main components in this whole ecosystem are liability, and on the other side, we need to understand what are the real relevant use cases. Because we had this discussion, and currently CLEPA, ASEA are running working groups, and one working group thinks about what are really the use cases and what are the data needed for that. And we make progress. And the more granular we get, the more we understand what is really needed. On the neutral server side, we have also open topics. I think we are in the beginning of designing this new ecosystem and to understand what is legally, technically, and commercially necessary to make use cases for all parties and market participants possible. And I think this is really adding value now to our discussion, And if we agree on that, and I hope that in the first quarter of 2017, we have really most of the relevant use cases thought through and have a solution for that and have shown proof of concept, I think then we made really the substantial step. And the 5 guiding principles, I think this is understood for all of us. And yeah, liability, safety of the vehicle, this is anyway granted. And here we need now to cover a little bit more on the fair competition field, how to ensure that. But we have the understanding that there will be one central point from where all market participants get the data from. And as long as this level is ensured that everyone in the market can get access at the same point, I think we can develop that model further and use this as the role model to get services really, or services around mobility really established, because we should be all aware it's all new for us, suppliers as well as the OEMs, and no one knows today what use cases will be the most relevant in 5 years, but we know what is ahead of us, and therefore it's now really time to make here progress to get things done.
Thank you. Dirk, I wanted to come to you because I wanted to hear how they saw it from their different perspectives. In terms of developing a legal framework, and Roberto Viola said earlier, we need the right framework and we need to get it right, and we have to, there's the speed issue, we need to resolve some of these questions pretty quickly, but we need to get it right. What for you is the central challenge in terms of a framework? Do we need a new regulation on access to vehicle data? So in a sector, this specific sector, to address some of these issues they're raising?
Well, first of all, we have already part of the framework, and that's the General Data Protection Regulation. It was said that almost all data are personal data. Probably not almost all, but many are. But an important, or 2 important points in the Data Protection Regulation, 2 important principles are that basically, and that falls under the big heading of data protection by design, first, that you try to, you can easily, if you collect personal data, anonymize them, so, and then there are non-personal data, and that's much easier than to deal with them. Second point is, if you have to collect personal data, you can have means to minimize how many personal data you have to collect. And again, that helps. Now, having said that, responding to the more general question, does one need a regular framework for access to vehicle data? I mean, we aren't there yet. I mean, that is really a question which goes for 2 reasons far ahead. First of all, do we need a regulatory framework? That's the first reason why it goes far ahead. And the second reason is, does it have to be into vehicle data? I mean, first of all, Roberto announced the communication. The communication will launch a public consultation, but will also launch a broad stakeholder discussion. We really need to see the use cases. I like a lot the emphasis on the use cases, but that's not only the automotive industry. There are plenty of sectors where this is relevant. Agriculture, you know, health, financial services, many, many other sectors. So basically, we really have to look, are there commonalities? First of all, we have to understand more about the problems. When we understand more about the problems, are there commonalities between the different problems which make it that the problem and possibly the solution is horizontal, or does one have to proceed indeed by sectors? And once we have the answer to that, then we need to look a little bit closer, what kind of solutions should there be? And at the end, obviously, these solutions should have a balance of interest. And we discussed already some of the interests involved, basically, but that's very important. So that, in a sense, yes, we need the same rules. We need to get it fast, but we need to get it right.
Okay, I'll get an opinion from all of you in a moment on whether that's true, that we're going far too far ahead to be asking that question now, and also whether you think this can be done cross-sectorally, or whether there are specific issues that you're addressing that means we have to do it sector by sector. But let me come out and see if there are any questions or comments to our panel at this point. Does anybody want to come in on this issue? I see one there. Hang on just a second. Thank you very much. please don't forget to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Many thanks. Sylvia Godson from the European Federation of Independent Distributors of Automotive Replacement Parts. We have discussed these issues about access to in-vehicle data and especially what we call the technical vehicle-generated data very extensively. There's at present also a study being carried out by the European Commission by the consultancy TRL, which looks into the matter. And I feel the discussion was a little bit too narrow on the current situation, because also from first equipment suppliers, we had excellent studies about that it is possible to have an interoperable platform realized, not perhaps today, but when we start today for tomorrow, with the Commission as legislator, then we would have really the possibility to have a fair level playing field, which is not possible with the proposal which is currently on the table, which is the extended vehicle combined with the new word is now back-end or back office facility. Because yes, there are use cases in the market. We need access to the full and fresh raw data from the vehicle. We need also an independent access to the vehicle and not filtered through the car manufacturers as a new monopolist on the data. And this is only possible when for prognostics and diagnostics, which is the key for innovation now in our sector and also in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other comments or questions to our panel? Hang on, let me just come round to you there, and then we'll come back. I want to take a few just because, in the interest of time, it's most efficient. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks.
Chris Carroll, Beck. I'm going to ask a rather provocative question. It was mentioned earlier about the importance of gaining consumer trust in more connected and autonomous cars. Of course, over the last year, the consumer trust in the automotive sector has been battered as a result of the emissions scandal. What's been shown is there's been a systematic attempt by car manufacturers to try and get around vehicle testing rules. My question to the panel is, why do you think consumers should trust car manufacturers with regards to privacy and data protection and liability and third-party providers of services such as insurance to get it right now?
Okay, so that trust issue is harder as a result of what has happened. How can you address it? Any others before we come back? Next to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bernard Lick from SECRA, the European Council for Motor Trades and Repairs. We think also that the manufacturers, and they say it very openly, want more and more direct contact with the customers, and at the same time, they normally, until now, the dealers and repairers have this direct connection with the customers. So if the manufacturers are also those who are deciding which data they put available or they make available to the other third parties, I think indeed it becomes a question of competition. And I would like to have the answer about this.
Okay. Sebastian, can you pick up on both points because they're very much directed at the vehicle manufacturing sector?
I mean, there were different issues.
Very different.
Yeah.
Yes.
Should I answer all three of them? Or?
Let us start with this question of trust, because it's been central to what we've been talking about all day. In this area, how do you convince consumers, customers that you can be trusted on this?
We have to work on this. Unfortunately, we had these issues and lost a lot of trust. We have to work on that. We are really committed to privacy, to transparency, and giving the customer the choice with whom he wants to share the data. So that's what we have to work on. We have to win back the trust. I agree, but I think we can do it because we are also in a position where we do not want to sell our customers. We want to offer services and a good service offering to our customers, and that's a different business model than other companies might have.
What about this point about the selectivity of data you share? Because it also goes to something Jakob mentioned at the beginning when he said, I'm not so worried about how you share it as long as the same information is shared with everyone. Can you answer that concern?
Yes, of course. I mean, there will be some types of data that could be highly competitive. Yeah? For example, if you have a the electronic control unit from one first-tier supplier, then probably it doesn't make sense to give that data to the other supplier. Yeah? But for the business models we are discussing here for third-party services, the access to this type of data will be non-discriminatory and fair.
Okay. Anybody else want to pick up on any of those? Yeah.
Just the fact on innovation was mentioned, and the way we see it is that when you pay a high price for, because again it is the user who's paying for the car. We have been working for many years, ASEA, Ergico, the Commission. We heard about eCall. eCall was meant to be bringing telematics into vehicles, and now development has gone much faster than the eCall. But we spent many years on bringing technologies into the vehicle that would benefit the consumer. So the innovation is key in my view, that when you pay such a high price for a very intelligent tool, then you should also make this a platform for innovative services that is offered to the consumer, and not just. I understand you want to have some competitive advantages, but from the consumer perspective,
devil's advocate here, if you've invested in that technology, don't you need to get a return on your investment?
Yeah, but the car is paid by the consumer, so it's the user who owns the car, and therefore this is a platform where you would like to have as many services offered as possible to get a good deal, good price, to get a choice.
Okay. Any other comments on this before we move? Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have to have some competition. You know, there are many people in the ecosystem who are capable of delivering connected car services. So from a consumer's perspective, choice is good. It's good for innovation. It's good for business.
Okay. And please, Dirk.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, these two questions and some of the responses show very clearly what I meant before when I spoke about the balance of different interests at stake. I just remember in September, the Commission organized a 2-day workshop. We discussed on the first day access to and transfer of data, and the second day liability. And the first day, we had suddenly, out of the blue, a very lively discussion, to say the least, between some representatives of the automotive industry and some representatives of the after-sale market. So precisely about those points. So it shows that basically any solution which we need to find needs to take into account legitimate interests on both sides. Of course, on one side there's a legitimate interest to have a fair return on investment, and there's a legitimate interest not to give business-sensitive data to competitors, because you ruin your own competitive stand. On the other side, there's obviously an interest that we have indeed a lively competition, and we have new market entrants coming into the market, especially if they are startups and small businesses who do not have, who need access to data in order to realize their innovative business models. We have to combine both. How? I don't know yet, but I mean, it is very important to be aware of this balance of interest and then to find a way, and that's why I said the right rules.
Okay, Frank.
But we had this intensive discussion about data and about the right business model. And when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprises coming up with innovative ideas, what do these people need? They need a safe and secure environment that they do not run into risks they do not see at the moment because they are new in that business. If we want to have new people in our ecosystem, I think with the solution, what is now on the table, at least this liability issue is solved, and we open room for them under certain given rules by legislation. At the moment, which is given from the data protection side or the data privacy side, but this opens them a secure place to offer these services. What we have to develop, of course, is the contractual situation. How does this work with a neutral server? How can we ensure that data are not disclosed customer data, which are their property, for example, and should not be disclosed? These are the discussion points where we need to more getting granular on that. But I think per se, at the moment, the proposal on the table is not killing innovation. And this was one of the guiding principles here when we developed it. And
I'll let Dirk come in, Sebastian, then I'll come back to you after that. Dirk.
Yeah, I think it's even the opposite, because I mean, you need less investment. So in the past, you invested in a dongle, or you need your own environment, and now you can get access just to this ecosystem, cloud or ecosystem, however you will design it. Yeah, so I think that's even positive for smaller companies.
Yeah.
Sebastian, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I also wanted to chime into that argument. The vehicle is a very, very complex system. Yeah? And if you are maybe a startup company or so, you don't have the experience to manage the system, especially not, I mean, consider the number of types of vehicles on the road and the long life cycle of a vehicle. So with the secure off-board facility, we will have a standard as well, yeah, that gives a standardized access. So if you are a startup, you just have to know the standard, and then you can talk to any vehicle manufacturer, or even easier, yeah, you just talk to one neutral server that will connect all other vehicle manufacturers.
So this can level that playing field as well. Frank, I know you want to come back with a...
One remark on the data. When it comes to data, what we did in the beginning was we said, okay, let's try to cluster these data. But then we came to the conclusion, oh, where does this lead us to? Probably it's better to work on the use cases. Imagine, for example, one thing, a use case which is probably liked by the oil industry. If you know the fuel level of 100,000 cars in a certain area, imagine what you can do in creative ideas with the pricing at the pump. Yeah? So is that the data we want to share all the time? Is that a use case we want to support? But these questions will need to be discussed. And the other thing is, what at the end is IP protected data? What is data of public interest, really adding safety and security and benefits to our traffic management? I think these things, and if we manage them to cluster them in use cases, I think we get a better understanding what is really needed at the end, and then we can talk the next level of how to make these available, and at the end, at what costs we had it in the beginning.
Jakob.
No, I'm just wondering who you are discussing the use case and the data quality and the possibilities with, because I think if you want to really create innovation, you would go to Slush, like today in Finland there's a Slush event where you have the world's top brains in innovative new services in all kind of sectors, but that's the kind of people you would want to discuss they can use to develop new services with. And maybe not so much in between manufacturers and suppliers, but more to the outside world on who would be the one who could then develop some interesting new services for the consumers.
Can I just ask, on this question of sector by sector, do you instinctively feel, in answer to Dirk's question earlier, that this will need to be done and will need to be addressed specifically for this sector? Or do you think there are similarities that can be spotted, that we can come up with something that will be more cross-sectoral and horizontal, or will we have to take it sector by sector? What would your answer be to that question that he's asking? Shane, what do you think?
I don't think we have to do it sector by sector. The connected car industry is just one sector of the Internet of Things. It's perhaps the biggest one right now, but you can address security and privacy issues right across the Internet of Things. And the GSMA have looked at this in the last year or so with ecosystem players from device manufacturers, cloud providers, automotive manufacturers as well, to see how they can secure individually their parts within that ecosystem. So we've looked at not just the automotive industry, but also the health industry, agriculture, I think it was suggested, a whole range of different sectors, and you can address security in that way.
Dirk, IBM are obviously working with many, many sectors. Do you think this can be done? Would you agree with Shane, or do you think there are specific challenges relating to vehicles that will require specific responses?
Yeah, I agree with Shane, but I see various areas. I mean, I don't see the sector of connected vehicles. So, I mean, first of all, here in Europe, we are very focused on advanced driving assistance systems. In the US, we see more commerce-focused use cases. So, I mean, if you just imagine, by 2019, we will have 31 billion electronic coupons in the world. And you spend so much time in the vehicle, so that's a very good area to get some return on your investment. So if you just spend it or just focus on ADAS, it's difficult. So the Japanese are also investing heavily in ADAS functionality around the Olympic Games 2020 in Tokyo. So I mean, as the number of use cases are so different, I don't see the sector, so that's why it's so different to respond to that question. And by geo, it's also different.
Okay. Other thoughts on this, sector by sector, Sebastian, or?
Well, I think many things can be done through the same, through all sectors, but there are specific challenges, and those are the ones that we discussed in the beginning of this panel, the safety, the security, and data privacy. That's location data, mostly in the vehicle, which also is a specific type of data. And secondly, the long life cycle of the car. So you need, if you think about safety and security, that's not a one-time thing. It needs to be managed throughout the entire lifetime of the car, and that's decades. And that's another reason why the off-board facility is the only thing that you can update over time.
And if we don't do it sector by sector, if we try to come up with these big answers to these big horizontal questions, is there a risk that this trade-off between fast and getting it right, we need to be fast and right, the more we look for common solutions that are cross-sectoral, that's going to take longer to do, isn't it, than doing it sector by sector, Dirk, or not?
Well, not necessarily. The first thing is, Roberto said it in his speech, what we don't want is, and also Ms. Sharantsova has mentioned it, what we don't want is every member state does his own thing, so to speak, and then we have a piecemeal approach of different but diverging rules. If we have that, we'll never get a competitive and well-functioning data economy running in Europe. So that's clearly something, but one of the purposes of the Commission communication in January is to signal to member states, look folks, we're dealing with it.
So don't you go doing stuff in the meantime.
And then basically, obviously, we have to have discussions with member states too, where the landscape is differentiated. Some member states are fairly far, others not at all, somewhere in the middle. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think we need to first find out whether there are such sector specificities, where they are, how big they are, and when one is able to say, look, do we need a horizontal or more sectoral approach? It could also be that there are some niches which are carved out where you would need a sectorial approach, and for the rest, you have a horizontal approach. I simply don't know yet, but we have to have these discussions, and definitely we will have them once we launch the public consultation and we discuss more in depth with stakeholders. We have already made a start.
What you do see as the time frame for all of this, once we have, obviously in January we get the proposals, the package, what's the time frame for coming to some conclusions, or isn't there one yet?
Well, there isn't a time frame yet. Obviously, the Commission has announced in the digital single market strategy this first step where we deal with the free flow of data and with liability in the IoT, and that clearly will be dealt with in this communication. So the first deliverable will be there, but then we need to have the discussions. I mean, and we have also a study running which provides more evidence. We had already several workshops and discussions at different levels, at the Commissioner Oettinger's level, at working level. There is a lot of discussion going on. That's good, basically. So we need to take advantage of these discussions. What we also need to do, and that's quite important, is sometimes I have the impression, but I may be wrong, in some member states where things are more advanced, there are quite a number of discussion strands going on, but often they're not connected. And And then you have to see this picture at the European level. So I think the discussion which we will launch with that communication in January, has also the advantage to bring together the different strands at national level for truly European.
Do you mean when you say different strands, they're talking sectorally sometimes, or they're doing it, some are doing it in a cross-sectoral way, some are, in what way do you mean different strands, just to be clear?
Okay, that can be what you said, but it can be also different. Let's take the example of insurance companies. Yeah? If you speak about insurance companies, as we just saw in that survey, is one of the prime interested parties in car data. Why? Well, obviously, third-party liability insurance, other insurances, and so on. So insurance companies have an interest for access in data for the services they offer. When we have a discussion on liability, if we come up with a liability scheme that may or may not be coupled with an insurance scheme.
Right.
For an insurance scheme, however, insurance needs data in order to be able to calculate their risk and to be able to insure what they should insure, either via the market or mandatory insurance. So again, the two things which are linked together.
Gotcha.
So it's different on a geographical level, it's different on sectorial levels, but it's also different on different subjects which are interlinked.
Okay. Frank, I didn't give you a chance to answer on this question of whether you think it needs to be done sector by sector or horizontally.
I think this is, at the moment, difficult to judge. There are definitely horizontal aspects which we immediately agree and say this is something what we can apply to the entire industry. But there might be specifics on the automotive side, and I think when we are a little bit further down the road with our development of this model, I think then we can come up with an idea, do we need specifics and specific regulations on the automotive side, but
and
it's too early.
Do you think we need to put a time frame on it? Or do you think actually this approach is the right one? Let's start the process and see. It's more important, it's important to be fast, but it's even more important to be right, was what Roberto said and what Dirk is saying. Would you agree with that, or would you like to see a timetable put on this?
Good, we have another boundary in the entire discussion. This is, the Commission is obliged to come up with a decision on the necessity of an access to data legislation by mid of next year. Therefore, I think the first half of 2017, this is the time horizon where we as an industry have to make up our mind, do we need that or not?
Okay, we are almost out of time, but I want to put you all on the spot, as I did with the last session, and we're talking about, and we talked a lot there about the process and how you do it and how we're going to get to where we need to. For each of you, and Dirk, I'll start. I asked you the first question last, so I'll start with you now. If you had to identify one key next step, one thing we need to do to ensure that we can get this balance, realize all these benefits, take the customer with us, has been pointed out throughout the afternoon, is so important, and address these issues in the most effective way possible. What for you is the key priority for action? Same question to you all in half a minute each, if you would. Dirk.
Yeah, keep on focus on off-vehicle back-end solutions and also on aftermarket solutions to standardize this way from the vehicle to this back-end to provide this service to more drivers.
Thank you very much.
I would love to see the first pilot projects being realized in the first half of 2017, where an independent service provider can get proof and test a first service he wants to provide via an OEM backend.
Okay, thank you very much. Shane.
I would say if you're providing a connected car service, to make sure that everybody in your ecosystem adheres to your security policies, because if you don't do that, you won't have a service.
Thank you very much. Dirk.
Well, first of all, the full respect of data protection rules, but then data protection is only pass pro toto for the right regulatory framework.
Thank you. Sebastian.
Yeah, I think we have now found a good approach, how we can continue with the off-board facility and the neutral server. And I agree with Frank that we should now come up to a proof of concept to show that this all works in practice. I think that would ease the discussions. And And secondly, I think we are already on a good way with the GDPR, which gives the choice to the customer. The customer needs to consent, and I think we should continue that way.
Okay, thank you very much. So prove it's doable, and we're halfway to answering all these issues. Jakob, you have the last word.
Provide access to high quality data that can be used to thrive innovation and will benefit the consumer and thereby also the industry that is providing them with the hardware in the first place.
Thank you. So we come back to where we started. It's all about the customer. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed?